Hi, everybody. My name is TJ Pache. I'm the creator of the Books and Ballots series. For anybody who's joining us for the first time, welcome. The Elections Group launched the Books and Ballots series 2 years ago to create a space where election professionals and researchers could share ideas, lessons learned, and practical insights from the field. I think it's been incredibly rewarding to watch this community grow and to continue the conversations that strengthen election administration across the country. As many of you know, Books and Ballots has expanded in partnership and available resources. In addition to these webinars, we now have resources available through Substack. We'll be reposting our conversations as podcasts, and all of these efforts are in collaboration with the Center for Election Innovation and Research and the MIT Election Data and Science Lab. For anyone who hasn't seen the series before, our goal with these is to showcase the most useful research for election officials. Today, I am very excited to be joined by leaders in the election science field to discuss their findings around trust in elections and voter confidence. These three distinguished professors bring years of knowledge and information to today's conversation. So let's get started by having each of them introduce themselves. We'll start with Professor Atkeson.
Turn on my audio. Hi, I'm Lonna Atkeson. I'm a professor at Florida State University, and I direct the LeRoy Collins Institute, which is a public think tank here in Florida. I have been in this space a very long time, and I always like to talk about my journey here. And that really started when I was a very little girl, and I sort of recognized the world around me, and I set up my own ballot booth box in my neighborhood when I was 7 years old. And that was my start to my election interest. I've always been excited and thrilled by elections. I was a, poll worker and precinct worker along the way. And of course, then I went on to study elections. And so that's sort of my background and story. And I'm excited to be here with other people who are thrilled and excited about elections.
Excellent. All right, Professor Kauser.
Hey everyone, my name's Thad Kauser. I'm a political scientist at UC San Diego. And along with my colleague, Lauren Prather, I co-direct the new Center for Transparent and Trusted Elections. And this continues the work that we've been doing with a team of scholars all across the country, working with election officials, folks like you on this call, people in statewide and local offices in Georgia, in Texas, Colorado, Arizona, California, Idaho, Oregon. We've partnered over the last two election cycles with all you folks who are at the front lines of American democracy to try to bring some data and some clear objective analysis to help inform the work that you're doing building trust in American elections. And then we've gone out to meetings. Lauren will be at the Election Center meeting in Jacksonville this week. We go out and present it and learn from you about what we need to do next. So I'm really looking forward to the conversation about what we can do to help support your efforts to build trust in American elections.
All right, excellent. I hope your colleague Thad has practiced their Duval chant being in Jacksonville. Professor Sutman Lee.
Thank you so much for having me here. I am an associate professor at Connecticut College and an Andrew Carnegie Fellow. And Lonna, your story about how you got into elections is so wholesome. I myself dressed up as Bob Dole for Halloween in 1996. So that's a long story. We don't have time for it. No, I'm really grateful to be here. I have been in this space for the last 8 or 9 years. Chris Mann was actually the one who really introduced me to this space. And my work is really interested in capturing what all of you frontline workers, state and local election offices, and civic organizations are doing on the ground already to engage your voters, to inform them, to combat misinformation, and give you a sense of, what's working, what isn't, but also just trying to understand how you build relationships with your constituents and support them in their efforts to access the ballot. So I'm really happy to be here, and I think this is going to be a great conversation.
Excellent, excellent. As a reminder to anybody joining us today, we're going to go through a series of moderated questions and then take questions from the audience. If you're here live with us, please drop your questions in the Q&A feature. My colleague Chris and I will look at those and hopefully be able to ask most of them or all of them to our panelists today. With all of that, I think we've wrapped up our intros and our housekeeping. So we're going to jump right into today's topic of trust in elections and voter confidence. So we're going to go in reverse order of what we just did. So we're going to turn first to Dr. Sutman Lee to give us a high-level description of the research that they've done in this area and where their findings are taking them, or what additional research they've been sparked to look at. Professor Sutman Lee.
Thank you so much, TJ. Yeah, as I just mentioned, the work that I do is really trying to capture and measure what state and local election offices are already doing on the ground. And I think if I could summarize the 30,000-foot view of what my findings have consistently told me is that trust isn't built simply by telling people that elections are secure. And I think that this is something that many of you know, but it's something that has been empirically illustrated over time. It's not just about one-off messaging or finding that perfect message. It's really built through lived experiences, through relationships, the relationships that you have with your communities, with your constituents, and consistency, messaging, and information that is consistently put out there. And so I think about trust in elections not as just a matter of messaging. It's really important, but also as this foundation that so many of you are already building in the work that you do.
Excellent. Let's go to Dr. Kauser.
All right. Thanks so much. So in the work that we do, which is taking the messaging strategies, whether that's social media messaging, short videos, election facility tours, whatever you are doing as election officials. And then we test this using scientific approach of large scale surveys and survey experiments that allow us to see like what actually works to build trust, what moves the needle among the public. What we found are really three key things that I think it could be news that you all can use. And the first is that the outreach you're doing to provide factual information about what the safeguards are on American elections, that actually works, right? Surprisingly, for some of our partners who thought that they were just shouting into the wilderness and none of this would move the needle with the public. But when people hear about those facts, they become much more convinced that they can trust that their own ballot will be counted as cast, that other ballots represent the will of the people. The second thing is that it doesn't have to be expensive, high production value, slickly produced videos. We've tested some of those that have produced, and in fact, many of them do work. But so do just simple videos done on a cell phone on the floor of an election facility that have someone going around and showing people who the election officials are, who are protecting their elections, what those protections are, and just giving plain spoken facts and opening the door to this world that voters really don't see when they just put their ballot in a box. They don't see what comes next. You open up that black box, you show them the people behind that, and a free to produce message filmed on your cell phone can be highly effective. The last thing another thing we learned is that being proactive in your communication really helps. So I think after 2020, there's a lot of focus on debunking claims about election fraud. And that can help get people, when people hear a claim of election fraud, they decline in trust, you debunk it, you can get back up to zero. But actually what we found in a few experiments is that pre-bunking, right? Going to people first and explaining how vote by mail ballots are protected, how those signatures are verified, or why it might take a few days to get accurate results. Those kinds of messages, if they're given before people hear a claim about fraud, they can actually have this long-lasting effect and kind of inoculate people against that. So going early, getting your message out, doing it through whatever medium works for you all, that can be truly effective in the work that you're doing.
Excellent. All right, we'll turn it to Professor Atkeson.
So I started visiting precincts in 2006, and I had a long-term relationship. I still have that relationship with New Mexico, especially various counties in there. And we've spent a lot of time in the counties watching the voting process and providing a lot of detailed information back to the counties and to the Secretary of State about what we saw. And that was integrated back into that process. And one thing I can say is that having that on the ground person over and over again provided a lot of cover for county clerks, for people in elected or appointed office, for election officials when things which went wrong, which they always do. It also provided a lot of really important feedback on ways to make the process better. And our presence in those environments also really impacted voters. One of my most important experiences was when I was in a precinct and someone just came up to me, randomly and said, you know what, you being here has made me feel so much more confident in the election, knowing that there are independent actors out there like academics who are participating in this process is really important to that. So I think that connecting with academics who can provide these kinds of ongoing relationships with you can help to build a better system and opportunities for information and opportunities for you to show to the community, which you do, that you care, that you have these people who are observing and watching the process. When I think about trust in the elections, I actually think more about confidence. And when we talk about it in our research, we really focus more on confidence than trust. And that's important because confidence is distinctive from trust. Confidence, in fact, is much more about the process. And what people want to see in an election is a really good process. And I agree with Mara that this is what feeds back into their ideas about whether or not they have an experience, because an election is not a one-time off. It's more like going to the Department of Motor Vehicles. You have an experience and then you have another experience, and that informs you about the process. So in terms of your own vote counting, it's really about your own experience, right? Do they believe that their own ballot is counted correctly? It's about their own experience. They experience the process. They know if they got their ballot on time. They know whether the poll workers were kind and helpful. And all of these kinds of things really matter to that confidence process because they experience it over and over again. And so if you're building, when we think about building an election, and of course, we've built these election audits. I just want to mention that we've built these things so that you could put all your ballots online. And we've done some experiments like that can show that, doing this can improve voter confidence. But I think the really long-term thing is the commitment to making that a good experience for the voter.
And I will mention, I am a big fan of Dr. Atkeson's work, especially with Leon County. I encourage folks to take a look at that. I know throughout this conversation, Chris and I will be putting things in the chat for folks to look at. I think most of you all touched on this, but I think just being explicit, if I'm an election official, I've got a lot going on, I've got primaries in a few months, I've got to begin the process of pre-election preparation. As it relates to your research, what's one thing or maybe two things, like concrete action items that I can take away from your research and put in place to improve trust, improve confidence? What would the one or two things be? And I'm happy to, whoever wants to answer first is obviously welcome. But don't everybody answer at once.
I'll take a shot at it. If I had to ask you to do one thing, I would say go right now, get a staff member and maybe get a few staff members who help you do outreach to different parts of your community. If you have that sort of large staff, or if it's just you and have one person hold the cell phone and have you just spend 30 to 40 seconds explaining the protections on elections and showing people how their ballot will be protected. We found that this really makes a difference. Even just the kind of, in one of the most recent experiments, what we did was a vertical style video that kind of looked like things that now the younger, anyone younger than me essentially spends all their life on either TikTok, Instagram, or one of these platforms, YouTube Shorts, seeing a very quick informal style video. And when we measured how much that changed people's trust in elections and actual factual knowledge of the protections on elections, like we quizzed them afterwards and saw that this increased their knowledge compared to people who watch a video that had nothing to do with elections. Just watching that quick 30-second video had a big increase in trust. And for people aged 18 to 24, who are the least trusting group, it was like an off the charts increase. So speaking to people in the genre that they're used to listening in, and putting that out on your website, in whatever social media you do, in whatever voter outreach you do, or putting an insert with your ballot pamphlets if you send one out that tells people here's how to vote, here's when to vote, and here's how we protect the vote. Just those little steps can make a big impact on trust.
I think we may turn that into a YouTube, TikTok, Instagram short right there for election officials. That's beautiful. Mara?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and I'll very briefly add to that. And Thad, I think that it's forgive me if I'm misremembering you or one of your colleagues has research sort of illustrating the importance of centering the voter experience in those kinds of connections. So, this is the process of your ballot from point A to point B, like not only after it's been delivered or put in the tabulator, but sort of what the actual, from receipt of the ballot to delivery of the ballot to counting of the ballot looks like, can really go a long way. The thing that I was going to add was similar in terms of encouraging election officials to go out into their community and see if you can identify, and many of you, I'm assuming, have done this, other organizations or businesses that might be trusted messengers that could support the work that you do. I'm going to flag, I don't know if we have anyone from Connecticut here on the call, but Secretary Thomas has a civically engaged organization program that I think is a really great model for this, because not only are you amplifying your message, you're also putting it out there to members of communities that may also have trust. And that's such a huge and important part of this work, is amplifying trusted messengers. And then also it sort of takes some of the weight off of your shoulders in terms of having to think about doing all of that messaging yourself, as fun as it can be to make like 30-second, 40-second TikTok videos. But that would be my number one suggestion.
Excellent. Lonna, anything to add there?
I just might say making sure that your office is really accessible. I remember when we started observing precincts, one of the things that we found is that people needed to connect with their election official, and sometimes that was very hard. And so we really increased the number of phone lines and these kinds of things, and it really mattered to voters to be able to connect when they needed to. And of course, ramping up those processes that allow for that. I think anything you can do to communicate what you do to keep the ballot safe and protected is really useful for people, because it's just one big black box. And people are also very uncertain, and we haven't done any videos on this yet, but I think it's an important piece for us to look at, is ballot secrecy, because no one knows. Like 40% of people have no idea if their ballot is secret, and it is, and it has an effect on their confidence. And so I think getting that particular information out could be very important.
Excellent. I really appreciate. I think most folks know I didn't go to school to do webinars, and the idea of standing in front of the camera talking for any period of time makes me deeply, deeply uncomfortable. So I hope election officials take that as a vote of confidence. Throw on your barbecue stained Buc-ee's hoodie. Go ahead and just share your message. I think it makes a difference. Well, we've talked about kind of what works and what you all have seen empirically and otherwise that works. What are some things that you've seen from offices that don't necessarily work? Are there, I don't want to name names or anything, but as you think about resources that have been dedicated to efforts, are there things that any of you have tracked that you say, well, that the juice wasn't worth the squeeze there?
I'll start with this one, particularly because I have a piece of research that I think is a resource that we can, I don't know if I listed this, Chris, but I'll pass it along to you. That's called Don't Drown the Message. The title is fairly self-explanatory. But what my co-author, Leah Maravaki, and I, sort of have consistently found is that overwhelming voters with a lot of information in one message, they're going to get lost in it. So if there's an issue area that you think is really important for you to emphasize, like, maybe there's a change in mail ballot regulations that might be top of folks' mind for some reason, target that, emphasize that, but keep your messages consistent and simple and concise as much as possible. And then I think the other thing I would say that I already sort of signaled at during introductions was that telling people that you should trust them, there's a backlash, or there may be a backlash. There's some great research by folks at the University of Auburn that have sort of signaled that this does have a backlash effect. And then Leah Maravaki and I also have some work illustrating the backlash effect of things like, saying you can trust me, or this is a trusted source of information, sort of without backing it up with that sort of process information.
Yeah, one example from our research that really confirms what Professor Sutman Lee was just talking about with show, don't tell, is we were testing in one state. They had two secretaries of state, and one was said, "Hey, I'm the former Republican Secretary of State." Another was like, "I'm the current Democratic Secretary of State. We both agree that you can trust elections." And that struck us as a really powerful message, right? This bipartisan people coming together, but nothing in that message actually told people why they could trust election. It was just two politicians standing up there saying, "Trust us," and that was one that we found had zero effect. But another message from that same state that showed local election officials, people who are a deputy registrar in this county and another person in another county, just telling you. And again, these were people who were not famous, they were not authoritative, but these were the real people doing the work, like you all, and they explained that. And that moved trust by a large amount in that same state. So I think showing rather than telling is key. Another thing that we found working with partners, one of whom is on the call, but we won't name names, is that video messages often are much richer and much more effective than static messages. So there are some visuals that this set of counties was looking at using, and they were really attractive visuals. And we did another scientific test where we compared those against visuals that looked the same but didn't relate to elections. And then the same later on in the same survey, we showed people multiple videos. Those videos that they had produced were highly effective. The visuals brought no impact. And so they were able to get that information in time and not spend money on those visuals, because it is really important not to put resources where it's not going to move voters. So really having visuals that illustrate that story, as Mara was saying, like from when people drop off that ballot, put it in the mail, drop it at a drop box, put it in that ballot box in the precinct, they don't really know what happens afterwards. Opening up that black box, telling them about all the hard work that you are doing, and showing them why that should make them confident in elections. That, along with all of the other important points that Professor Atkeson was making about voter experience, those things are going to increase trust.
Yeah. So TJ actually mentioned it. So back in 2022, we worked with Leon County, which is the same county that I'm in here in Florida, where Florida State is in Tallahassee. We worked with Leon County and Mark Early, and we put 100% of the ballots online, and we centered our online experience around the post-election audit, because we think that that is an important event, because it tells voters that the count is actually legitimate and accurate. And I hope that you can't hear the people coming down the stairs behind me, but my guess is you can't. Okay, you can't. Yay. So we did some experiments on this, and where we showed people the dashboard, and we showed them each their own detailed reports from their county audit, or lack of detail depending on the county, or we showed them Leon County dashboard. And we found that the data from the actual, just looking at the information from their county, which sometimes was thick and sometimes was very thin, in general had no impact on their voter confidence. But looking at it in the dashboard and being able to filter things and being able to look at the data and look at the ballots themselves did have a significant effect.
Excellent. I'm going to depart a little bit from our normal run of show, and I'm actually going to go directly into the chat or participant questions. May come back to other ones, but I have the first one here, which is from someone who is very, very jealous of my sweatshirt. He says, "I'm especially interested in the relationship between trust in elections and the post-election calendar. Thus, Does a longer gap in time between election day and final certification diminish trust? Do any of you study that question, and or do you know of studies specific to it?
Sure, that is a great question, Judd. And in fact, our team has a study. I'll try to figure out how I can put it in the chat, but it's in some of the resources I think that are being made available. So in 2022, this was a real topic of conversation, as well as 2020, because the states that rely mostly on mail ballots and have a constellation of other election laws for good reason take a few days to report. And in Arizona, in that 2022 governor's election race, it was about a week before enough results were reported, because it was so close, for the AP to make a call. And so we did an experiment that we published in a peer-reviewed journal, and then we also have kind of a one-page summary for election officials. Here's how you can use this information, that showed that when people heard, so about half the people heard, hey, there was this election, the Democrat Katie Hobbs won, here were the results, and the other heard, there was this election, it took a week for the election returns to be finalized, Katie Hobbs won, so the only thing that changed was that delay. People who heard about that delay, this was a national audience, were about 8 to 9 percentage points less trusting of that outcome. So this is sort of causal evidence done by randomization. We can show that actually the suspicion we've all had that taking a while to count elections, that does lead to voters to have suspicions. But what we also did was, a quarter of the people in each of those groups, we showed them a video in advance of hearing that was produced by the state of Arizona, called Accurate Results Take Time. It's like a 40-second cartoon video, very easy to produce. And it just talked about the reasons why it takes a while to count these ballots, and counting them and doing all the verification on them is really important. For the people who had gotten that, what's called a pre-bunking message, they'd heard first the reasons for delay, then heard about the delay, they had hardly any dip in trust. They only went down 2 or 3 percentage points. So that does show that both, speeding up the count could help with public trust, but also being really clear in advance about why accurate results take time can help to increase voter trust. And hopefully we can figure out how to share those resources.
I see some stuff coming through the chat for folks. Anybody else on that? All right. Let's see. We've got some more questions here in the chat. Many voters' own experience